Good morning and welcome to the 8th Community Foundation webinar, Adaptive Philanthropy in Times of Change. I am Emily Thompson, Director of Donor Services at CFGG. I am happy to be here today as we speak to the experts in housing and how we can work together to make a measurable difference right here in Greensboro and Guilford County. Before we get started, I want to remind you that we are recording this session and we will share it on our social media and our CFGG website. We are also asking that you make sure you mute your microphone, and to help this run efficiently, we ask that you put any questions you have into the chat box and we will answer those questions at the end of the session as time permits. We know that life is returning to normal, so the time is of the essence and we will try to continue to keep this at 1 hour. We have lots to cover today. We are going to hear from extraordinary people who have spent their careers in housing. Bob Powell is the chair of the Housing Committee at CFGG and is the associate professor in the Architectural Engineering program at NC A&T State University. Bob Powell is a gem in this community, and I know you will be interested in hearing him speak about how Greensboro and CFGG are involved in sustainable housing. Also joining us today is Bob Kucab. Bob is the retired executive director of North Carolina Housing Finance Agency. Bob has had a 40-year career in managing local and state affordable housing programs in Michigan, Idaho, and most recently North Carolina. Finally, joining us today is Walker Sanders, president of CFGG. Walker has been leading CFGG for 23 years and has been instrumental in the efforts to increase affordable housing through our initiatives. So let's get started. Bob Powell, would you mind kicking us off and telling us a bit about how CFGG has been involved in housing?
Has the same 40-year history in affordable housing. Let me just get rid of the thing. Okay. And we have partnered with the city of Greensboro, with local banks, with home builders, many nonprofits to address the several problems related to affordable housing, homelessness, and just people who have issues related to maintaining a home. And again, I serve as the chair of the Housing Committee. The Housing Committee is a volunteer group of probably 10 to 12 people, very knowledgeable about what's happening in the city. We track what's happening across Greensboro in many different areas. And we make recommendations to the Community Foundation Board related to funds that the foundation actually has that are used to invest in housing development, and then also to provide grants to local nonprofits to serve individuals who may need the assistance. Several years ago, we organized a community-wide visioning session, conversation that looked at housing issues in Greensboro. And based on that discussion, the Housing Committee has 3 areas that we focus on. The first is housing supply. How do we get more houses and of all types, single family, multifamily, supportive housing, many different areas? What can we do to increase the supply of housing? There's not enough. There are 20,000 families in Greensboro, and probably more at this point, who are in need of housing, and either from a supply standpoint or second area of focus is serving individuals and families who, even if the supply is there, they're housing insecure. They're spending too much money on the housing that they have. They can't afford the housing that they have, or they may be getting ready to be evicted. It's a large problem in Greensboro right now, and all the way to homelessness. So what are the services that need to be provided? And frankly, I see several people on the call who are some of the nonprofits working in this area. So our goal is to see how we can really serve them as well. And then finally, third area, and we have 3 subcommittees. The third subcommittee is the Advocacy and Education Committee. And frankly, that's the committee that kind of sponsored this particular session, because the idea is unless the community knows about what's going on and is informed and can communicate with the powers that be, then nothing happens. And so, frankly, again, that's the impetus for this session. We're really coming to you today as folks, not necessarily as donors, but as important citizens in Greensboro. And we want your voice to be heard related to this issue. And frankly, at this point, Bob, let me turn this over to you to describe this initiative that the governor has proposed for the state of North Carolina, and what do we need to do to make this happen?
Well, thank you, Bob, and good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's having a healthy and safe summer so far. I just returned from a trip to a wedding in Chicago, and I was surprised at how big an adventure it seemed like it was. So we're approaching normalcy, but it doesn't quite yet feel like that. Thanks a lot for this opportunity to discuss affordable housing. I think, like all of you, I believe in the transformational power of affordable housing. It affects everything from health to wealth, everything in between. Thank you all as well for your support of the Community Foundation and for the work of Walker and Emily, Tara, all the staff at the foundation, and thank you guys for putting this together, and Bob for kicking it off so well. So I don't want to bury the headline. So let me just say, I think we have a once in a lifetime opportunity, and this is not hyperbole, I mean it. We have a once in a lifetime opportunity to address affordable housing problems in a substantive way. And I think we need to emphasize 2 points. One, we know how to solve affordable housing problems. Bob Powell described a number of things. I'll say a few more things. We know how to do this. We should be confident. We know how to do it. Secondly, we need to raise the public discussion to a higher level. Those are the 2 points. So just a bit of background about me. I spent 40 years in affordable housing, as has been said, most recently at the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency. I don't speak for them any longer. I'm retired. I'm a free spirit. The HFA, however, is a great asset of the state. It's a success story. It was created by the General Assembly in 1973. It has a self-supporting public agency structure with a single mission, one mission: finance affordable housing in partnership with the public and private sector. And that's been a big role in the Greensboro community. It uses bonds, tax credits, federal and state appropriations, a range of tools. But one of the most important tools is the North Carolina Housing Trust Fund. It was created in 1987, again, by the General Assembly with good bipartisan support to focus on the needs of extremely low-income households. It leverages $5 of housing for every dollar invested, creates jobs, expands tax base, does all the things that we want done. The agency and the trust fund have financed over 300,000 homes and apartments worth over $30 billion. And that team at the agency is ready to take its work to the next level, as I think is the group of organizations working in Greensboro, because I think you've got a great platform in Greensboro. You've got a local commitment of funds. You've got a well thought out 10-year plan. You've got good city staff, strong housing coalition, and you've got successful local housing organizations. It's important that we all acknowledge that. I'd be remiss if I didn't plug one person, and that person is George Carr, whom some of you may know, founder of Beacon Management. Well, back in the early 70s, George, who was then a much younger person 50 years ago, he was one of the visionaries who was instrumental in creation of the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, because he really wanted to advance what was being done. And he also was responsible partially for me coming to North Carolina. So I owe him a double debt of gratitude. So Bob Powell did a good job of describing our challenge. Just let me say a couple of things, because I think they're shocking, really shocking. Housing costs have increased faster than incomes for the last 6 decades. 6 decades. Government policies have complicated housing inequities for minorities. I'm not going to explore that, but I'm just going to say, if you want more information, read The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. It's a good read for people who really want to know how we got where we're at. And the problems are significant. Sometimes we see them as overwhelming. But I was in Greensboro in 1990, around 1990, and I heard Jim Rouse of the Enterprise Foundation speak. And I think it was at the opening of the Spencer Street Apartments. I don't recall a sponsor. I think it may have been Crosland Properties. But I do remember one thing Jim Rouse said. He said, when you see the enormity of the challenge, it's important to keep one thing in mind. Big problems require big solutions. And I'll never forget that. It was simple, but yet it's profound. We need big solutions. He's right. For too long, we've just been chipping away at the edges of housing problems because our local organizations haven't had sufficient resources to really scale up their work. We've got to change that. We haven't solved homelessness. We haven't made progress on making housing a human right as it should be. North Carolina has a lot of great housing organizations doing successful work, as does Greensboro. Again, what we need to do is scale up. So let me say we have unique opportunities, once in a lifetime opportunities to change the status quo right now. And I'm going to broaden it just a little bit, folks. I apologize for this. I hope I'm not going outside my bounds. But President Biden, he proposed a $2.25 trillion infrastructure bill with $318 billion of new money for affordable housing. Now, keep in mind, HUD's budget for the year is under $60 billion. So he's got a force multiplier in there. The current Senate compromise proposal would spend about $10 billion a year, dramatically less, and most of that for veterans programs. But what would it mean in Guilford County? Just think about it. If there were hundreds of new rental assistance vouchers to help the homeless, if there was 15 times as much money to improve public housing and rebuild it where necessary, I think the Housing Authority would be pretty excited about that proposition. What if there were 15 times as much money for the local home program to repair homes, help first-time home buyers, build rental housing? And there's a $10 billion fund that's created for innovative local solutions, which I think Greensboro would be well in line for. So that's the kind of scale that we're beginning to see as possible. Closer to home, Governor Cooper, he proposed an appropriation of $575 million to the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency for affordable housing out of the American Rescue Plan money that has been received. So this is not hypothetical. This is money that the state is receiving. 500 million of that would go for new production and rehab. 75 million would go for first-time home buyer programs with an emphasis on teachers. So the state Senate has proposed its budget, and they recommend level funding for the Housing Finance Agency of $30 million. All public money is important. That's a good investment. It's not going to change where we're at. It's not going to scale up. It's not going to move the needle. What would it mean to Greensboro if the Housing Finance Agency had 20 times as much money to award to local producers? Well, it would mean that more rental development would get done, like the type that David Levy and Affordable Housing Management do, Hope Court, Summer Ridge, Muir's Landing, properties like Beth McKee Huger and the Church of the Holy Spirit are doing with Mills Construction. It would mean more supportive housing for people who are homeless and extremely vulnerable. Think of the Servant House, Partnership Homes, Greensboro Urban Ministry, the YWCA program to help people who are homeless. It would help urgent repairs, fund many more urgent repairs. Think of Community Housing Solutions and what they're doing successfully. And then again, it would help first-time home buyers. And keep in mind, Habitat could scale up their operation significantly, and they enjoy widespread support. So unfortunately, both of those big solutions, which I think are right on the money, are at risk of being lost. Now, I'll say in fairness to elected officials, they have appropriated some money for help renters and homeowners who are facing eviction because of back payments that they haven't made. So there is that's being done. But importantly, there is no money in that, none, for new production. That's just to keep people in place, many of whom are in housing that they can't currently afford. So they'll be able to catch up, but then they'll fall behind quickly. So what can we do to get more housing production funding? And again, this is an area where maybe I'm off my topic a little bit, but I want to talk a little bit about public education. John Lennon, back in the 60s, you can tell I'm an old guy, said famously, if everybody demanded peace instead of a new TV, then we'd most likely have peace. Well, again, he's making a simple point. The voice of citizens matters in a democracy, and elected officials, Congress, and the General Assembly are not hearing enough, not nearly enough, about the need to invest in affordable housing. I think elected officials want to do the right thing. They want to help their district. They want to help the state. They just disagree about what that help should be. The time for voices on housing is absolutely right now. And I want to emphasize this. It's not partisan and it's not adversarial. When I spoke at Willow Oaks, which is the redevelopment of the old Morningside Homes property, on the dais with me and Elena Strosky with the Housing Authority was Senator Elizabeth Dole. I'm sure you remember her, prominent in the Republican Party. And she extolled Willow Oaks and the Hope 6 program and all it represented. I reminded her that her husband, Senator Robert Dole, back in 1986, was the creator of the low-income housing tax credit program, which produces more affordable rental housing than anything else in our country's history. When I spoke at Hope Court and Summer Ridge, there were both Democrats and Republicans who were speaking about how we needed to do more of this. Well, we now know how to do more of this. We need more public resources. Housing is a capital-intensive asset. The average apartment, new home, a minimum of $175,000. Depending on what income level is going to be served, the subsidies need to be significant to meet community standards. So I think the message on all this is positive. We have successful programs, but resources are inadequate. Any local example that you favor is really helpful. So if you believe in Habitat, if you believe in community housing solutions, if you believe in Greensboro Housing Coalition, Urban Ministry, any of those local examples help. I think we need to be clear and concise and not make this much more than a focal point. And I think we need to be a little more persistent. One text, one call is not going to get the job done. We're going to have to be a little more persistent to see this through. So how can we deliver the message? And again, this may be more than you want, but I think it's important. The best communication is always personal, firsthand. But that's impractical in this day and time. And I knew a lobbyist in Washington who always used to say, there is no paid lobbyist in Washington that is more important than one outraged constituent sitting in the outer office. And that's really true. People can make a difference with their voice. So in this matter, letters, texts, phone calls, phone messages, all of those things matter. Finding phone numbers and emails for elected officials is really easy, maybe easier than they want it to be. There's a link that you can go to at ncledge.gov. Find your legislator. In fact, if you just type in North Carolina General Assembly, find your legislator, it'll take you to a tool, which is really easy to use. And what it'll provide you with is your U.S. House member. Of course, we all have the same Senate members. And it'll take you to your representatives in the General Assembly. I would say, as to the $318 billion proposal, the communication should be primarily made with our U.S. senators, because that's where our support is weakest. But I wouldn't ignore House members in the communication. As to Governor Cooper's $575 million proposal, the communication should be with members of the General Assembly, as well as, and including, I should say, the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate. So with Representative Tim Moore and Senator Phil Berger. There's also information about other leaders, the majority leader and the majority whip. If you have extra energy, they're good contacts too. Both the president and the governor have made bold proposals, very bold proposals, once in a lifetime proposals. I've not seen the scale of these in my experience, and you have to go back a long way to see anything remotely approaching it. So what do we say? It's, again, pretty basic. I think for members of Congress, it's support President Biden's $318 billion proposal for affordable housing infrastructure as a part of any appropriation on infrastructure. Always good to add. We've got successful solutions in Greensboro. Give your example and say that housing needs are rising. 1 in 3 households are cost burdened. We need over 4,000 new affordable units. The message can be really that simple to the North Carolina General Assembly, to House and Senate members, to the Speaker and President Berger. Support a $575 million proposal for funding to the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, and support a $50 million appropriation to the North Carolina Housing Trust Fund, which is a proposal that's been around since just after 2000. So for 20 years, the appropriation to the trust fund is now about $7.5 million, which is exceedingly inadequate for a state of our size. And again, I gave you examples what that would mean to our local housing organizations. Our voices are needed now more than ever. We can all make a difference with this, not only us, but your family, your friends, your church colleagues, anybody that you think believes in the transformational power of affordable housing. Listen, even if we don't secure the 318 billion or the 575 million, we will advance the public discussion. And that's important. And maybe we can get that $50 million for the Housing Trust Fund to help extremely low income households. But I'm not going to give up, and I hope no one on the call will give up on the real need for all this to get done. We know how to do this. We know how to solve these problems. The challenge, again, seems daunting. We need over 4,000 rental units in Guilford County, and 1 in 3 are cost burdened. And we can spend a lot of time wringing our hands about that. Well, again, going back to my 60s background, Joan Baez used to say, the best antidote to despair is action. And action is purely and simply what we need. We need action in our public discussion about affordable housing. Again, I'm Johnny One Note. We know how to do this. We know how to solve the problems. If you need more background on information about these proposals, or if you need guidance on doing advocacy, I think the North Carolina Housing Coalition has some really good resources on their website. It's free. And also Beth McKee Huger has produced a document, I think it's called the Bishop's, it's the Bishop's Committee on Affordable Housing. And you may have seen the link in communications from the Community Foundation. It's got examples of local success stories, and it's also got information on advocacy and links and that sort of thing. But again, underscoring all this is nothing will change if we don't ask for change. And if there aren't many more voices from many more stations in life, many more occupations asking for that change. So again, thank you for being part of the presentation. Thank you for being interested in what I think is one of the most important topics in our country today. Housing inequities are rising. They're unacceptable. And again, we know how to turn the tide. We know how to solve some of those problems if we have the right resources. Let's ask for those resources. Please let me know if there are any questions that I can answer. I appreciate being asked to be a part of the panel. So with that, thank you, Bob and Emily.
Bob, that was wonderful. You are very helpful in explaining all of that, and we appreciate you. We do have some questions that I've received to my direct messaging, but I'm going to have Walker, if he wouldn't mind, talking a little bit about housing and CFGG. Just so all of you know, that there are some links in the chat that we have put there, and Walker has put the 10-year plan for the city. I put the Find Your Legislator and the Bishop's call to support that Bob referenced also. So Walker, if you would like to talk briefly about the 10-year plan here. Walker, you're muted.
You know, you'd think after 18 months of being on Zoom calls, you'd remember to unmute yourself before you start talking. Maybe one of these days we'll go to a Zoom call where you don't hear your muted conversation. So what I was getting ready to say is just wanted to thank everyone for being on this call. I'm looking at all the faces and recognizing you have kind of the who's who of housing in Greensboro on this call. And I kind of feel like I probably should not say anything and just kind of look around and let all the experts that are on this call really talk, because I think one of the things that Bob said that really stood out to me was that we know how to solve this problem, and you have the experts on this call. And I think one of the things that I think in Greensboro, we have a will to want to do some special things around housing, and we certainly have the expertise to get those things done. What I put the city's 10-year plan in the chat just to remind everybody that we do have a roadmap that's been developed. Most people on this call were part of that process that was started in 2016 with a series of community conversations around what do we need to prioritize, how do we need to increase the stock, and how can we leverage more money to really address the huge need that we're facing in Greensboro. The sad truth is, despite all these efforts, since 2012, there's a chart in that 10-year plan that you'll see the need has spiked in the opposite direction in terms of the need for affordable housing. Almost 49% of households now in Guilford County are facing housing crisis, and so it's very alarming. But we can use that as a call to arms, as a call to action to come together. Right now, the foundation is working very close with the city of Greensboro to develop some comprehensive funding opportunities for housing to kind of leverage some of these federal dollars, as well as try to raise some additional private dollars to do that. And so as we develop those plans, we'll certainly be talking more with all of you and doing that and putting together some large loan funds that other communities have done that we'll try to mirror that shortly. And hopefully within the next 60 days, will be somewhere we can kind of talk to this group again about some opportunities for Greensboro going forward. I really just wanted to kind of bring that 10-year plan to everybody's attention, and certainly welcome some additional comments from others on this call, knowing that we have some folks' expertise that we'd like to tap into.
Great, thank you. I have a few questions here. I'll just go ahead and ask those, and maybe they'll lead to some of those other points that we want to make while we're all here together. What the Housing Trust Fund, how does that work? And do developers apply, or do municipalities apply? How should Greensboro position itself best to be ready?
So the Housing Trust Fund, which has been around since 1987, so it has a track record in Guilford County and across the state. It is a dedicated fund that receives money from the General Assembly and then invests in programs which are available to local governments, for-profit, nonprofit developers. The programs are primarily supportive housing for people who are extremely vulnerable. It's the biggest supplier of funding for domestic violence shelters and permanent housing to help persons who are homeless. Urgent repairs to, again, support the work of organizations like Community Housing Solutions, helping people, seniors in particular, but people with disabilities, live independently longer. It also funds rental housing to get rents low enough so people of lower income can afford occupancy, and it can help Habitat for Humanity with its work. So each of those categories is a program, and each program has its eligibility criteria. So what's best is, if somebody's interested, to monitor the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency and see when they have a request for proposals for a particular program. Scott Farmer is my successor at the Housing Finance Agency, doing a whale of a job. Scott or his team would welcome a call if somebody has an interest in how to get a particular thing started or funded, or when the next cycle may be coming up. There is a group of people called the Housing Partnership. It's a 15-person body that's appointed by the governor and the General Assembly, and they actually manage how the Housing Trust Fund is parsed out to programs, and then they monitor the results. So in terms of accountability, this thing is like off the charts. The Housing Partnership, they do public meetings about every other month. The agency's board and staff, again, everybody's interested in how best to do that. So if there's feedback on what's been missing, I'm sure they'd like to hear it. If there's an interest in getting something started, I'm sure they can help provide that information.
Great, thank you. We have a question, Walker, that perhaps you can address. What about the Greensboro housing bond that might be put forth this fall? Is that on the table, and how much? And how can we communicate support for that if it is on there?
That's probably a better question for the city. I'm trying to look at the calls here. I know there's some discussions about that fits into a lot of other discussions around other bonds that the city is considering. So I don't believe any final decisions have been made about a housing bond. I know there's a consensus among many of the city council members that something needs to be done. There needs to be more resources. A lot of the bond that was approved in 2016 has already been allocated. And so there's a need for more. I think, but they're still in the early process of that. There's a big focus right now on what kind of resource can be put together for a permanent supportive housing project that's moving forward in a positive way for us to put kind of the first permanent supportive housing complex in place. And so I think it's premature to kind of give more details than that, but know that those conversations are taking place. Again, looking at this group, this really kind of serves as a quasi task force that I think if everyone's willing, that we can pull together quickly to kind of talk about these things as they come forward. The advantage of virtual sessions, it makes kind of convening easier. The disadvantage is you don't get that personal interaction. So, but I do think it will be beneficial for us to kind of continue to have this conversation with this group as we learn more and that process gets further developed.
Bob, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, just a bit. A couple of points quickly. I think Walker made the necessary points about the local commitment. Two things. One, a lot of programs, federal, state, require that there be a local contribution. And so Greensboro having some additional money to put into a development can be a leveraging factor in the scoring for affordable rental development or some of the things done through the Housing Trust Fund. That is exceedingly important to have a local resource, so it shows local commitment. I was on the steering committee for the City of Raleigh housing bond, which passed last fall. One of the things that surprised me was people who said, didn't we pass a $50 million bond 5 years ago? And didn't that fix the problem? There is an enormous misunderstanding about how big the problem is and what it'll take to fix it. It will take local money, state money, and federal money if we're going to make real progress. Again, we continue to chip at the edges, but we need to tackle this head on. Permanent housing for the homeless is something that's been done successfully. We need to do so much more of it that local, state, and federal money will be indispensable. So I endorse any and all efforts to pass a housing bond for the area. And again, don't let that be viewed as the solution. It's really going to take the full range of investments.
Okay, thank you. The questions are coming in fast and furious right now, so I'll try to get to those pretty quickly. Considering home ownership is the ultimate goal, is there a best allocation for funding and focus areas?
Well, I'll give my general understanding, which is, home ownership works for a lot of folks, and there are tools to get there. Second mortgages that reduce the amount that has to be borrowed to buy a home, and subsidies to include a write-down of land costs so that properties are more affordable, and interest rate reductions to ensure that people can afford their monthly payments. Those tools are out there and available both through the Housing Finance Agency and through the city, probably using home program money. And I think they're really important. Homeownership is probably the easiest thing to communicate and sell to elected officials. But it's not addressing the needs of extremely low income and those people who are at risk of homelessness. I think if homeownership is the interest of the Housing Finance Agency, has a range of programs, subsidy and deep subsidy, shallow subsidy, that work. But make sure the discussion includes all the types of housing needs that are out there, so that people can at least get 1 foot on the rung of the ladder.
Thank you for that. Let's see here. Is there a listing of city neighborhoods in some order of priority insofar as need? Powell, I don't know if that's something that you want to address.
So there are a variety of neighborhoods that have a need. I know in the past, we've talked about kind of the donut of neighborhoods that surround downtown. And so look at that in kind of 2 ways. One is a matter of need, but also a matter of opportunity. And so, I'm a segue to another piece of this. In terms of neighborhoods and the growth of the city and a healthy city, one of the issues is that we want to encourage different types of development that feed the economic viability of the city, so that as opposed to just suburban development that gets to be kind of what do you call it? Stretching out and sprawl. By having infill development and different ways of providing a little bit more dense development within the kind of, again, this donut and the area around the city, that produces really value for the whole city. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also talk about kind of the needs of East Greensboro. I see Mac on the call. Certainly, the efforts that are being made to improve housing in the eastern part of the city are critical to the whole city.
Great, thank you. What progress has been made in establishing supportive housing?
I'll say what I know, which is that not enough. Although I think we have agreement more and more about a housing first model, that if folks are homeless, the answer, not surprisingly, is a home. And ensuring that everyone has access to a safe and affordable unit, however big or however small it is. I like the model in Charlotte of what Urban Ministries has done with Moore Place. So if you Google Urban Ministries Charlotte and Moore Place, you'll come up with a description. And I think what they do is create as much housing as they can in efficiency style apartments, and then have a full range of services which are available to the tenants, whatever their need is. The services aren't mandated, but they're available. And it is not a simple development to produce, but I think it's been really, really effective. And I believe Raleigh is trying to replicate what they've established in Charlotte. And for supported housing that helps people who are homeless with disabilities, and again, a high percentage have disabilities of one type or another, that model, I think, has been the most promising. Although there are other folks doing other good things, and the Housing Trust Fund has been a part of most of them.
I would maybe kind of add, don't want to put them on the spot, but we have a kind of a local expert that's done a lot of analysis around housing, and asked if Dr. Sills would like to make a kind of comment on some of the work that's been done in Greensboro, looking at the housing stock and the income disparities in various neighborhoods.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Walker. To Bob Powell's point, there are a list of neighborhoods that the Invest Health Initiative identified, as well as in the affordable housing plan from the city. Both overlap significantly in East Greensboro, neighborhoods that Max Sims and East Greensboro now are tackling currently, trying to get support from neighborhood residents, neighborhood associations, businesses, churches, and groups in those communities. I just dropped a link in the chat that goes to a map that we produced a few years ago, a study funded by the Community Foundation that allowed us to look at almost every parcel in the city. 78,000 parcels out of 100 and some thousand were examined. And we created a market segmentation map. This showed us housing quality. It showed us the local market conditions. It showed us neighborhood attributes that are positive and negative as they play out in the housing market, both rental and homeowners. And you can see that disparity. You can see that the red areas of weakest market are in East and Southeast Greensboro. The orange areas of kind of transitional neighborhoods, South and Northeast, the comma, the crescent that Bob and others mentioned. And this goes way back. We've been researching from 1808 when the city was founded to present day, looking at some of the planning decisions, some of the federal decisions, redlining, et cetera, and how they've played out. So underlying much of our discussion today is this equity issue, substandard housing, the lack of affordable housing, the lack of entry for folks who could afford a home. They're paying $850, $900 a month in rent. They could be paying that in a mortgage, but there's no entry-level homes in their neighborhoods that are of good quality. All of these issues wrapped up in this map that shows such disparity over a long period of time. Happy to share our findings in terms of specific neighborhoods if you just send me an email, chcs@uncg.edu.
Thank you. That's great information to have been shared. We appreciate that. And one thing I just want to note, I have two more questions to ask. This is just the beginning of our conversation. I don't know that we've said that in the beginning here. We're going to have another one of these specifically for housing in the fall. So I do want you all to know that, that we're not done with this conversation, obviously. A question that came to me directly, how does the food desert issue relate to housing deficiency? Which is a great question. Anyone want to take that?
Again, I'll make a comment from my experience. I think food deserts are another side of the equity failings that we have, where in low wealth neighborhoods, there's a scarcity of things that most of us enjoy, an overabundance of, including access to fresh and healthy foods. It's not surprising that some of the other problems of low wealth communities, whether it's diabetes or issues like that, are more complicated and more multi-generational. Those things need to be thought about. Communities need to be complete, and some cities are thinking more about that than others, but that's really, again, where it takes a public-private partnership. None of these things get solved just by government. It takes a public-private linkage to bring in necessary commercial establishments to make communities viable and whole.
And I would kind of add to Bob's comment, some things that we've been working on. I know Jim Kennedy made a comment about the disappointment of the Renaissance Community Co-op not being able to be successful, and that was a big hope to address the food desert over there. One positive outcome that's happened since then is Second Harvest Food Bank has created a satellite distribution center over there in that space in partnership with Self-Help. and is really beginning to serve and address a lot of that need. So that, and that was a local philanthropy played a big role in raising a significant amount of money to help with the upfit and the startup of that effort. And so that, I think that's one positive thing that's happened recently to in that area to address that food desert. So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention.
Thanks for mentioning that, Walker. We had a great tour over there, and they're doing great work over there. A final question that I have specifically for you, Bob Kucab. What happens to the American Rescue Plan funds if they are not allocated, if the legislature doesn't allocate them?
Well, my understanding is that they will be absorbed into the state's budget, which is allowed under the federal statute. So that $5.7 billion was made available to the state. And again, the same money is available to Guilford County and the city of Greensboro in smaller amounts. And it's meant to help some states where they have budget deficits. They can just absorb the money in and pay for schools and roads and other things. And so in North Carolina, and I'm going to put this really simply, and I hesitate for anybody to take this as gospel, but the money is in addition to all the other revenues the state has. The state is probably going to make some adjustments in the tax code if the Senate proposal is followed, and then put the remainder in the state's rainy day fund to take advantage of the surplus and save for a future day. So the money doesn't get sent back. It remains in the state, and the general view is it's being used to buttress the state's rainy day fund and allow for an adjustment in taxes. And Emily, I apologize for this, but I did want to make one point. Stephen mentioned people unable to find entry-level homes, and somebody asked about home ownership, which I kind of stumbled through. But I would say that Stephen said it, the biggest problem is builders aren't able to produce entry-level homes. Land is too expensive. The support of a local government with its zoning provisions, subdivision ordinances needs to be examined. We're 5.5 million homes behind where we should be in our country. You only solve that with more production, catching up. So there really needs to be a discussion about how do we produce more entry-level homes that are affordable for people to buy. Habitat's working on it, but it's going to take a much, much bigger effort involving the private sector. Sorry.
No, don't apologize. It's great information. Thank you all for being here. I am accessible to forward questions or get you in touch with Bob Powell or Bob Kucab or Walker. On our website is our staff listing. Always get in touch with us if you have questions. Like I said, this is being recorded and we will post it to our website if you want to forward it to anyone. Please let us know any thoughts for our next session that we will do on housing, in addition to other topics for our Adaptive Philanthropy series. With that, we hope you all have a great day and the rest of your week, and thanks for being here.
Thank you.